Okay, so picture this. You're on the stunning white sand beaches of Punta del Este in Uruguay. You've got luxury villas, fancy hotels. It's a total modern paradise. But not too long ago, a really dark piece of history was pulled right out of these very waters. I'm talking about a massive 400-kilogram bronze eagle with a swastika clutched in its talons, salvaged from the seabed. Just think about that. A shocking relic from a violent past, just lying there, right offshore from this beautiful, peaceful resort town. It raises one huge question. How in the world did that get there? Well, to answer that, we have to rewind all the way back to 1939 and to a voice that had all of Britain listening.
Yep, that was Winston Churchill. He was Britain's first Lord of the Admiralty at the time, and he was announcing the end of a terrifying predator on the high seas. This was the end of the very first major naval battle of World War II. And the story of that eagle? Well, it's the story of its ship, the Admiral Graf Spee.
All right, let's get into it. In those first few months of the war, the South Atlantic was basically Britain's lifeline. All these convoys were bringing in essential supplies, grain, meat, you name it. So naturally, that whole area became a prime target for the German Kriegsmarine, their navy. Their goal was simple, to strangle Britain's supply line. And for that job, they had built the perfect weapon. Meet the Admiral Graf Spee. Now officially, it was a so-called pocket battleship. On paper, it was supposed to stick to the size limits set by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. But not so much. In reality, thanks to some really clever engineering, the Germans built a 16,000-ton monster armed with massive 11-inch guns. It was designed for one thing, and one thing only, long-range commerce raiding. This quote just nails the genius of its design. Think about it. The Graf Spee could outrun any of the big, heavy battleships that could actually sink it. But it could outgun any of the faster cruisers that could catch it. It was basically a lone wolf, a high-tech marvel built to hunt and never, ever get caught. And boy, was it successful. Between September and December of '39, the Graf Spee was just prowling the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, sinking 9 Allied merchant ships. That's a mind-boggling 50,000 tons of shipping sent straight to the bottom of the sea. It was causing an absolute logistical nightmare for the Royal Navy. But here's the part that's truly remarkable, almost unbelievable. It's this number, 0. In sinking all of those ships, the Graf Spee's captain, Hans Langsdorff, didn't cause a single death among the Allied crews. He had this strict, almost old-school chivalrous code of honor. He'd stop a ship, bring its crew aboard his own as prisoners, and only then would he sink the empty vessel. It was this really bizarre moment of civility right in the middle of a total war. So as you can imagine, the British Admiralty was getting desperate. They had hunting groups all over the globe looking for this one ship. And the man in charge of the South American sector was a Commodore named Henry Harwood. Now, he wasn't just sitting around waiting. No, he was thinking. He was studying his opponent. And he was laying a trap. See, Harwood was a meticulous strategist. He correctly guessed that sooner or later, the Graf Spee would be drawn to the busiest spot, the shipping hub at the mouth of the River Plate. It was the perfect hunting ground. So he gathered his small force of just 3 cruisers, the HMS Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles, and he patiently waited. Harwood's whole plan was just brilliant. It hinged on this one crucial weakness in the Graf Spee's design. To save weight, the ship only had one main fire control system for its big guns. That meant it couldn't really target multiple ships at once. So Harwood's genius idea was to split his force, attack from 2 different directions at the same time, and force the German ship to choose. Either split its fire and be way less effective, or totally ignore one half of his squadron, which would let them get in dangerously close. And then, at dawn on December 13th, 1939, the wait was finally over. Harwood's squadron spotted a plume of smoke on the horizon. The hunter was about to become the hunted. And just like that, the first naval battle between Britain and Germany in the entire war kicks off. And it is incredibly violent. For 20 straight minutes, the ships are just pounding each other with everything they've got. And all of this is happening with the beautiful sun rising over the Uruguayan coast in the background, a brutal exchange of steel and fire. But this is where Captain Langsdorff made a critical mistake. He saw the smaller British ships, and without his scout plane up, he assumed they were just little destroyers protecting a merchant convoy. So, wanting a big final win for his mission, he charged forward to attack. In doing so, he gave up his single greatest advantage, the superior range of his massive 11-inch guns. And the cost of that one error was absolutely devastating. In the close-range fight that followed, a British shell slammed right into the Graf Spee. Now, it wasn't a fatal blow, but it did something almost as bad. It wrecked the ship's fuel purification plant. The ship ran on a crude oil that had to be processed, and this one hit meant it had only 16 hours of usable fuel left in the tank. So now, Langsdorff is in an impossible spot. His ship is damaged, and with just 16 hours of fuel, a return trip to Germany is completely out of the question. He can't fight his way out, and he can't run. He's got only one option left: limp into the nearest neutral port, which was Montevideo, and try to make repairs. The Battle of Steel was over. A whole new battle was about to begin.
With the Graf Spee stuck in port, the conflict totally transformed, almost overnight. It wasn't about cannons and armor anymore. Now, it was about international law, diplomacy, and a masterful campaign of psychological warfare waged by British intelligence.
Langsdorff calculated that he needed 2 weeks to get his ship fixed. But the British diplomats, they were all over this. They cited the Hague Convention and pressured the Uruguayan government to give him only 72 hours. And then they got even more clever. They used another rule that says a warship can't leave port within 24 hours of an enemy merchant ship. So they kept sailing merchant ships out to legally pin him down, buying themselves precious time. At the exact same time, British intelligence was putting on an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. They knew German agents were tapping the local phone lines, so they started broadcasting fake conversations about a massive fleet waiting just offshore, mentioning the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and the battlecruiser HMS Renown. Out at sea, Harwood's damaged cruisers were creating smoke screens to make it look like more ships were arriving. And the bluff was a stunning success. Captain Langsdorff, exhausted and totally isolated, became convinced he was facing an overwhelming force just over the horizon. The reality, get this, it was just the same 2 battered British cruisers, low on fuel, low on ammunition, just hoping their bluff wouldn't be called. So on December 17th, the 72-hour deadline was up. A crowd of 300,000 people packed the waterfront in Montevideo. They were expecting a spectacular final battle, a real showdown on the River Plate. But Captain Langsdorff, well, he had other plans. The Graf Spee sailed out of the harbor as the entire world watched. But instead of turning to fight, it just steamed a few miles out into the shallow estuary. After his crew of over 1,000 sailors was safely evacuated, demolition charges were detonated. The magnificent warship just erupted in flame and smoke before settling right into the mud of the riverbed. The consequences of this were just immense. For the Allies, it was a huge morale victory during a really tough time in the war. British spies later managed to salvage the ship's advanced radar from the wreck, which was a massive intelligence coup. Tragically, Captain Langsdorff took his own life 2 days later, and in a final, very telling act, he wrapped himself not in a Nazi swastika, but in the flag of the old Imperial German Navy. Many of his crew, rather than go back to Germany, just stayed and built new lives in South America.
And this brings us right back to where we started, to that Bronze Eagle pulled from the wreck back in 2006. Its discovery sparked this huge international dilemma that's still going on today. What do you do with something like that? Do you preserve it in a museum as a historical warning, or should it be destroyed to prevent it from becoming some kind of neo-Nazi relic? It's a really tough debate about how we remember a very complicated past.
In the end, Captain Langsdorff's own words are maybe the most powerful explanation for his decision. He refused to sacrifice his young crew in a battle he was convinced was already lost. His final act wasn't one of cowardice, but one that chose humanity over a hopeless fight. And it leaves us with a pretty big question. What is the true meaning of honor, especially in the darkest of times?